The parade always started with the beating of the drums at midnight. The drummers were first in line, leading on the rest of the parade. The monotonous thudding would evoke the bittersweet feeling of anticipation inside of me. It meant that the most exciting day of the year in our town had finally arrived, but that it would also be over soon. The sound would be followed by dozens of warm lights, held by townspeople in long white robes, moving through the narrow streets with determined gazes. The rest of us would stand by the sidelines, watching the lights while hypnotized by the steady beating of the drums. The parade ended at the marketplace in the center of town, where usually the market was held, with a big party. The lanterns would be attached all around the big place that was filled with booths and food trucks. There would be music and dancing, usually until the sun came up again. For the first 17 years of my life, I had always only been a spectator, but this year, I would finally carry one of the lanterns and be right in the middle of the excitement. I lied and changed my birthday on the application. You had to be 18 to be a carrier, but my birthday was still a week away. But it worked. When I received the letter with my official invitation to be a carrier, I shrieked so loud that my parents thought I was going mad. My father was born in town and had carried a lantern himself a few times when he was younger, but my mother only moved here with him a few years before I was born. Carriers couldn't be older than 30, so she had never walked among them, but she always insisted that she didn't mind because she found the parade itself slightly eerie. She only liked the party. I can't exactly blame her. From an outside perspective, it can feel a little odd. The marching, the outfits, and all that fire. But when you have an open mind, you see it for the wonderful tradition it is. And that's how I saw it, or at least used to. I thought it was an honor to be among the carriers, and the cherry on top was that my best friend June was chosen as well. When the day of this year's parade finally came, I was more than prepared. I had picked up my robe earlier in the morning and ironed it. It was a little too big for me, so I had to make sure not to trip. I'd eaten a carb-loaded dinner and gone to the toilet 3 times before leaving the house, so I definitely wouldn't have to pee during the march. June picked me up at 10 a.m., and together we made our way to the meeting point on the outskirts of town. Most people who saw us in our robes on our way there smiled at us and waved, but some also had solemn looks on their faces. "I can literally feel the excitement in the air," I said to my friend. "Yeah," she mumbled. "But have you noticed how weird some people are looking at us?" I shrugged. "They're probably just jealous." As I said those words, I noticed a woman in her front lawn staring at us while watering the bit of grass in front of her. As we got closer, I saw that the water was even reaching her shoes, but for some reason, she didn't move. Even when the can was clearly empty, she was still holding it tilted. A shudder went through me, and I moved my gaze away from her. Anyway, not our problem. I linked my arm with June's and quickened my pace. "And how excited are you for the party? This is the first time my parents will let me stay out all night for it." A grin spread all over her face. "You mean the first time they know you stayed all night?" The meeting point was already packed with people. Most were wearing robes like us, but there were also volunteers handing out lanterns and matches, as well as some water bottles and energy bars. The drummers were readying their instruments, and this year's parade leader, Maximus Abrams, walked around with a clipping board, explaining to everyone which position they would have in line. Maximus was an overly excited citizen of our town. Everyone who lived here knew him, but I found him rather insufferable. He always wore the sharpest-smelling cologne, had far too much gel in his shoulder-length hair, and loved to be involved in all types of town business. When he reached us, he gave us a warm smile. "First-time carriers?" he said as a way of greeting us. We both nodded. "Wonderful. We're excited to have you in this year's parade. I'm sure you will have a marvelous time." He took a quick look at his clipping board. "I'll put you both in the 7th line so you can be together. But," and he really emphasized that word, "no chatting during the march. The only sound will be from the drummers. You have to be focused, keep the pace, and whatever happens, do not get distracted. There are marchers behind you, and if you suddenly stop or trip, we will have a line of dominoes all falling on top of each other." He stared at us with eyes so wide that I thought they might pop out any second. "Yes, of course," June said, the side of her lips slightly tucking upward. "Fantastic. And remember, you do not light your lanterns before you hear the drums." With that last instruction, he left us and moved on to the next people. The last hour passed in a heartbeat, and before I knew it, we were already getting in position. June was on the left and I was in the middle, and then the person who would be on my right showed up. "Hey, Cassie," I heard a familiar male voice. "Oh, hi." I smiled. Darian lived in my neighborhood and his parents were friends with mine, so I'd met him a few times before. It was 5 minutes before midnight when one by one the few houses around us all turned dark. It would be the same on the other streets on the route. It was custom that anyone who was still at home would turn out their lights, so the lanterns had an even stronger effect on the night. "I don't think I'll ever get used to this," Darian mumbled. "Have you done this before?" I asked. "Only once, last year." I saw June peeking over from my left side. "How was it?" she asked. "Kind of freaky, but fun. To be honest, I don't even remember much of the night." He laughed. Someone behind us shushed us and we stopped talking. Next, the street lanterns turned dark. And as we stood there, in the pitch-black night, not making a single sound, the first drum signaled that it was midnight. It was followed by the other drums, beginning a steady beat and signaling to us that it was time to light the fires. I looked over at my best friend and saw her smile light up in the warm light. And then we started marching. As we walked further into town, we noticed more and more people by the sides watching us and the lanterns. We kept our promise and kept quiet. Suddenly, I forgot all about my too long robe or the fear of tripping. I felt like I belonged, with the people around me, and I didn't look over. But I was sure that June felt the same way. I lost all sense of direction, and couldn't even say if we'd already passed my house, but it didn't matter. All that mattered were the people around us, the children watching with big eyes and bright smiles. But as we walked further, something shifted in the atmosphere. At the beginning, I could still hear people calling to us or cheering, but suddenly the spectators were eerily quiet, as if they were frozen in time. The smiles disappeared from the children's faces, watching us with tilted heads. The empty expressions of the adults resembled the ones of the lady on the lawn. I tore my gaze away from them and simply stared at my lantern. It felt as if my heart was beating as loudly as the drums, and I started feeling nauseous. From the corner of my eye, I saw some movement on my left. I slowly turned my face toward June and noticed that she was watching me. She was watching me while she was walking, not missing a single step. And then her mouth opened wide as if she was screaming, but there was no sound. I opened my own mouth to say something, but no words came out, and then I could have sworn that for a second, her eyes turned white as sheets. I was so in shock that I didn't notice that my robe had caught under my shoe. I tripped and was close to falling when Darian grabbed my arm and steadied me. Luckily, I'd managed to hold on to my lantern. It was a trick of my imagination. I had to keep walking on, I tried to tell myself. In reality, I was just too scared to look at June again. The rest of the parade passed in a haze, and before I knew it, we had reached the town center. The people started spreading around to find places for their lanterns. Finally, I dared to look at my friend, but she was gone. I tried to call June, but she wouldn't pick up, so I walked around the festival, looking for my parents or other friends, but there were too many people, and the loud noises from every other corner distracted me. So I aimlessly continued walking around with no real target in sight, but I started noticing something odd. Most people were enjoying themselves, but there were a few who caught my attention. When I passed the carnival ride, the old-fashioned horses going round and round in circles, I felt a woman was watching me. I stopped right in front of the ride, and the woman's gaze was on me every time the horse passed. At first, her face was serious, but with each turn, her smile started to spread, wider and wider. I shook off the shudder that went through me and walked on. But then I noticed more people watching me, all with that hungry gaze. Some of them were in small groups, but most walked alone. I tried my best to ignore them until I finally spotted a familiar face at the cider booth. My mom was chatting with friends. Her cheeks were rosy, and she looked so happy that I finally felt a moment of peace and safety. I felt even more relieved when she told me that she met a completely fine June in one of the drinking tents. That's when I decided to call it a night and head home. On my way to the exit, however, I bumped into Darien. "Aren't you dying in that?" he asked. "What?" He pointed to the thick robe I was still wearing and laughed. "It's like 1,000,000 degrees tonight." "Oh, I forgot about that." His smile turned into a frown. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I looked around to see if anyone was close enough to hear us. "Did you notice something weird during the parade?" "Like what?" "The people. The atmosphere. I don't know." Darien moved a hand through his dark hair but stayed silent for a moment. "Kind of," he finally admitted. "I thought it was just me. I mean, the monotonous beats and the lights, I think they put me in a hypnotic state or something. I only snapped out when I noticed you tripped. But I didn't really look at the people before, just at my light." I nodded. "The hypnosis thing kind of makes sense," I laughed. "Maybe I hallucinated a little. Anyway, I'm heading home. Have a good night." "Are you sure you're okay? I can walk with you if you want." "No, it's fine. It's not far and there are still a bunch of people around." There weren't a bunch of people around. All the streets that weren't in the town center were empty, and suddenly I regretted not taking Darien up on the offer to walk me home. I steadied my pace, and just as I was rushing around a corner, I bumped into someone. The smell of sharp cologne immediately hit my nose. "Hello there, carrier. Cassie the carrier," he said as a big grin spread on his face. He'd just appeared out of nowhere. Why was he not at the festival? "Oh, hi. Glad to see you're still wearing your robe. Not many take the ceremony seriously enough." "Uh-huh." All I wanted was to get home. Small talk with Maximus was the last thing on my mind. "Do you feel it? The shift in the atmosphere? It's getting more and more right each year." His grin stayed on the entire time. Then he started staring at me as if he was trying to look through me. And then he did the strangest thing ever. He started sniffing me. Suddenly, a deep sense of unease settled in my gut. Something told me to get away as quickly as possible. "My dad is expecting me. I should really get home," I lied. He nodded. "Not yet, I see," he whispered, the grin leaving his face. "What?" "I could have sworn it would be you. But don't worry, you still have time to be chosen." I wondered if I should just push him and run, or whether I was being paranoid. But before I could make the choice, I heard footsteps behind us. My heart almost left my chest as I saw who was approaching us in a long white robe. "June," I muttered, relief rushing through me. She embraced me from behind, her nails digging into my stomach. She smelled foul, like sulfur, and when she spoke, her breath felt cold against my skin. "What a wonderful night. What a wonderful world," she whispered. Then her eyes went to Maximus, and they just stared at each other. She let go of me and took a step away. And then I saw it again. This time I was sure I wasn't imagining it. Her eyes turned white as paper. And as I looked at Maximus, I realized that so were his. I stumbled back and hit the wall of a house. June simply started laughing. My breathing became so fast that I started seeing black in front of my eyes. The last thing I wanted was to pass out at his exact moment. "Hey, Cassie!" A new voice pulled me out of my sudden trance. It was Darien, walking up to us. I glanced at June and Maximus, whose eyes had turned back to normal. June gave me the sweetest smile. "You. I remember you," Maximus said in a deep voice at Darien. "He loved you. Thought about you as his soul shriveled away. Too bad he couldn't even be buried, but maybe you can join him next year." "What are you talking about, man?" Darien nervously laughed. June interlocked her arm with Maximus. "Enjoy your night, sweetie." She winked at me and they proceeded to walk away. What the fuck just happened? The relaxed look on Darien's face disappeared the second the other two left. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. So instead I asked, "Why did you follow me? You seemed really out of it. I wanted to make sure you were okay." I wasn't sure if I could trust Darian, or if I could trust anyone, but I also didn't feel like walking around alone, and at least the other two left when he showed up, so I let him walk me home. The light at the front of our house was on. My father was sitting on the steps leading up to the porch, looking into the distance. When he saw me, there was sadness in his eyes. "I forgot," he whispered. "I forgot what it's like. I always forget." "Dad? What are you talking about?" I kneeled on the steps in front of him. He looked so weak all of a sudden, so broken. "Every year we celebrate, and every year we forget what changes. It's a ceremony. We hold a ceremony for them, and we don't even know it. We present ourselves with the lights, and they take one of us. Just replace them." Darian got closer, but we both stayed silent, waiting for my father to continue. He gently put his hand on my cheek. "I saw you among them. It went by so fast. I'd forgotten what happens. I always forget. But you're okay. You are yourself, aren't you?" "Dad," I started, but then he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was as if he'd awoken from something. He quickly shook his head and smiled. "Oh, honey, you're home already." The sad expression vanished from his face. "Hello, Darian. We saw the two of you together in the parade. Did you have a good time?" Darian nodded but kept staring at my dad. "Alrighty, I'm heading to bed. Don't stay out too late, yeah?" He winked at me and made his way up the stairs and through the door before I could stop him. "What in the actual hell is going on?" I muttered. Darian sat down on the stairs next to me. "I don't know. I know it sounds completely insane, but what your father just said sounds familiar. I keep thinking, but just as the thoughts form, they vanish again." I grabbed him by the shoulders and fixed my gaze on him. "Try to think. Remember, you were a carrier last year. What do you remember?" He kept looking into my eyes, his expression empty. But then he blinked a few times and tears started forming in the corners of his eyes. "My brother," he whispered. "I went to the parade with my brother last year. He was older than me, moved out when I was 10, and even though he lives here, we lost almost all touch with him. Until last year, when he reached out to me and convinced me to sign up for the parade." "What happened to him, Darian?" A tear slid down his cheek, and suddenly I understood. "Maximus is your brother." I took his hand in mine, and together we just sat there, defeated and scared. We sat there until the memories disappeared from Darian's mind again. And I was alone. All alone with the knowledge of something horrific that nobody in town would ever believe. All alone, mourning the life of my best friend. I try to remember June's smile in the warm light, the look of anticipation and happiness in her eyes. I try to think about that, and not of the moment everything was ripped from her. When her eyes disappeared, when she tried to scream for help but nobody could hear her. How the same thing must have happened to Darian's brother and countless other people here, and how it will happen again next year.